there, and you're listening to the Get Meal Prep Show, a podcast about meal planning strategies, improving your nutrition, and getting dinner on the table. I'm your host, Susan Watson, registered dietitian, lifestyle nutrition coach, and meal planning strategist for the online course Get Meal Prepped. I'm so happy to have you here today and share this episode with you, so welcome. Before we get started, if you find this episode beneficial, interesting, or helpful in your journey to be healthy, please let us know by leaving a review on iTunes, subscribing to YouTube, or sharing this with your family and friends. You can leave a review about our show straight from your podcast app by searching Get Meal Prepped Podcast, then click reviews and then write us a review. We would love to hear from you. So today I'm talking with Andrea Hardy about the 7 rules to recipe makeovers. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Get Meal Prep Show. Hi Andrea, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's been a very busy week for me, doing lunch and learns and talking to people about meal planning and meal prep. And I was going to say, I think that we should say that our new titles are meal planning strategists.
Yeah, I think that's so true because we do help people strategize based on their particular needs, right? Like it's so individual. What's your problem? Okay, let's come up with a solution. And everyone's problems, even though they're very similar, can be quite different based on family situation and work and all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're going to be meal planning strategists. That's our new title.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the 7 rules to recipe makeover. So this came up from one of the clients or friends that is beta testing our Get Meal Prep program, and it's our online meal planning course. And she was telling me that, she's got her meal planning sorted out and she's doing really well. But the next thing she's going to do is, now that she's got her recipes from her master meal list, she wants to go ahead and take a look at them and just do some recipe revisions and making sure that they're as healthy as they can be. And I thought, hey, this is a great topic for a series of podcasts on how to upgrade or redo your recipes and make them a little bit healthier, because sometimes you might have a recipe that's a win for everybody else in the family, but maybe you look at it, it's like not as healthy as it could be.
Right. And it's constantly that, what's the 1% better that I can be? What's the 1% better I can do? And just starting to tweak and change recipes is such a great way to start.
So you finally found recipes that everyone will eat, and then you realize that probably not the healthiest, aka hash brown casserole. Andrea, I'm sure you know what hash brown casserole is. Have you had it before?
Yeah, so that's a famous one in the Harvey household. So that's my, family's household, with the hash browns, the mushroom soup, the cheese. It's a big hit, but it's really lacking in, quality nutrition for sure.
Color? How about color? It's all one color.
Yeah. Creamy. Is that a color?
Yes. Yeah. When I used to go to some moms groups, when I first had my kids, that was kind of something when we'd had brunch that a lot of people would bring, and it was really good. It's great comfort food, but definitely can have some room for some upgrades. So we all know that meal planning is hard enough on its own, never mind finding healthy recipes that you and others that you might be cooking for will love and enjoy. So now you're thinking, how do I make these not so healthy recipes healthy? And I'm just going to say even like healthy or healthier, because as you were saying, like even 1% is a change, it's better. And we don't want to take a look at, completely transforming a recipe into something new. We just might want to do a few tweaks and upgrades. So let's talk about the rules to recipe makeover. So when I was doing the plan for this podcast, I just started going right into the different recipe ingredients that you can swap and upgrade. And I thought, you know what? I think we need to step it back just almost one segment and talk about some of these rules to recipe makeovers, because I just want to set the foundation for when you take a look at a recipe and some of the things that you want to think about before you go ahead and completely scratch out all the ingredients and transform things. Because sometimes there's things that you can do that work and some things that don't work. So let's go into number one. And the number one rule that I want everyone to think about is that the goal of a recipe makeover is to think about finding ways to reduce fat, sugar, salt, and increase fiber. So those are 4 things to think about when you're looking at a recipe. When we get asked as dietitians, is this a recipe that's good? Those are the things that we are looking at to evaluate. So sometimes when you're evaluating a recipe, you can tweak all 4 areas, and sometimes you can't, and that's okay. Even small improvements can add up over time, so don't discount making small changes to a recipe because it all does matter. So Andrea, what are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. Ultimately, if you can make even a small change, for example, in lots of recipes, you can double up on the veg to amp up that fiber without having a big change in how the recipe turns out. So I do think that those small changes over time can make a big difference on your health and wellness.
All right, well, let's go on to number 2. When starting out, I want you to think about never fully swapping out the full amount or the full ingredient for another. Not at least until you're fully confident in this is my new word, the swap out ability.
I've definitely lived through some mistakes there, so that's a really, really good tip.
Yes, so for example, let's take a look at some baking recipes call for swapping out applesauce for sugar. And it's actually a really good swap technique, but you can't always swap out the same amount of sugar in all recipes. So you have to try it out in smaller amounts first until you get a feel for its swap out ability. Some muffin recipes, you can fully swap it out altogether and take out the sugar and use mashed up bananas or applesauce, and the recipe will work out totally fine. But in some recipes, it's better to just reduce or cut the sugar quantity by half or 3/4 and not removing all sugar. And that's just because sugar has certain properties that will make the taste and texture of the muffin or your baked goods a certain way. And it's not a bad thing to have a little bit in. It's always a great thing to reduce or just bring the amount of sugar down. I found that most recipes you can definitely cut it by at least half with very little changes. So the take-home message here is do not swap out, or not all swap out techniques work for all recipes. Try swapping out the ingredient in a test batch first and make note of it on your recipe card. I've often revamped a recipe and then just kind of wung it, and it worked out. And then I'm like, oh man, how did I change it? So use a pencil and just make a recipe note. And even if you're just trying it, you can just put a little column by the recipe and say I'm going to cut it by half first, and then try it again, cut it by 3/4. So have you had any interesting revisions?
Guys, I always say, people fall into 2 categories. They either are great at cooking or great at baking. And I'm more of a cook because I like to cook by taste and by flavor. And you can't do that with baking. So a lot of times when I bake, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to swap this for that and this for that and this for that. And then by the time it's baked, you can't unmake those mistakes. Like in cooking, you can fix things with flavor and all of that sort of stuff. You can't do that with baking. So a lot of times I'll swap out, I've tried eggs for chia eggs and sugar for applesauce or bananas and the fat for lentils, pureed lentils. And all of a sudden my recipe is no longer what it should be, and it's, inedible. So definitely doing it stepwise and learning and not cooking a huge batch at once for something that might be a complete flop.
Yeah, and definitely don't try swapping things out for your kids' function that you have to bring something for.
Or like cookie swaps this time of year.
Yeah, try it out first and make sure it's a tried and true recipe. Okay, number 3, don't get too carried away when it comes to making over recipes. Sometimes it's better to keep the recipe as is and just have a smaller portion. So really, when it comes to the enjoyability of food and pleasure and taste, I would personally rather have a smaller amount of a regular chocolate chip cookie than having 5 horribly bland, artificially sweetened cookie creations. I call them creations because when you start cutting things out and adding artificial sweeteners or too much applesauce, like they turn into a bit of a creation. And, I think people think, oh, now I can have 4 or 5, but really it doesn't make that big of a difference. I would rather have one really good, I guess, unhealthy or less healthy cookie and eat it mindfully and really taste the flavors of the chocolate than 5 or 6 not so great cookies.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that one. Quality over quantity.
Yes. Okay, number 4. You don't always want to cut all the fat out of a recipe. Sometimes a minimum amount of fat is needed to achieve a pleasurable taste. Reducing the amount of fat in a recipe is a better option rather than cutting it all out. So keep that in mind. You don't want to necessarily cut it all out because you'll really change the quality of the recipe.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to go into more detail in this in our next podcast. So
Yes.
Tune into that and get really great tips on fat swaps.
Yes, exactly. So here's a shocker that I want you to think about when it comes to a rule. Replacing sugar with honey or maple syrup isn't really a huge recipe improvement. Now, 1 tablespoon of honey is about 64 calories, and 1 tablespoon of sugar is 48 calories. So it's only about a 16 calorie difference. So if you're going to swap out sugar for honey, do it because you like the taste, not for the calorie savings. How many times have you heard this, Andrea, that people are making health changes and they've cut out all sugar and they're just like loading up on honey?
Right. It's that like, okay, I've turned this cookie into a healthy cookie by quote unquote using a natural sugar. But really it's no healthier. It's kind of that health halo effect of, honey being the healthy sugar. I mean, sugar is sugar. So
yeah. A very minimal difference. So that's shocker number 1. Shocker number 2, and tip number 6 is, swapping out sea salt for regular salt actually makes no difference in the recipe either. So all salt is sodium chloride, and it all comes from seawater, even table salt. So sodium is the main ingredient of salt, and all types of salt, for example, table salt or sea salt, are high in sodium. Healthy adults need only about 1,500 milligrams of sodium each day, and this is the amount about 2/3 of a teaspoon of salt. So I've also heard people when they're redoing their recipes, well, I'm going to take out regular salt and put in sea salt, and yay, I've fixed it. But we're saying, no, not necessarily the case. You definitely want to decrease the salt in the recipe. Sometimes I leave it out and then just let people add it when I'm serving the food. I find that a lot of people like to add salt to their meals as a habit. So if you are like this, maybe you can leave most of the salt out of a recipe and then just add it at the end. And most recipes, like if I'm making soup, it'll call for 1 or 2 teaspoons of salt. And I'll just put in like maybe 1/4 just to blend the flavors together. And then at the end, I'll sprinkle some salt at the end to finish the dish off.
And I think it ultimately gives you control over how much you add. And same thing with us. Like we'll use no salt added canned tomato products and like a lower sodium chicken broth. And then at the end, does somebody want to add salt to that to amp up the flavor? They can make that decision, or you can have control over that decision.
Yeah, and I was reading somewhere about our taste buds and that it's, when you're deciding to go ahead and reduce the salt, it could take up to 3 years for your taste buds to really get accustomed to a lower salt taste. And so, if you go cold turkey and just totally cut out all salt, you probably won't be very happy with the recipes or what you're cooking. So if you can just start now and whatever you're used to putting in your meals, just start cutting it back a little bit. It'll take time, but your taste buds will adapt and a lower amount of salt won't taste as bland. And I noticed one time I went somewhere and we have a very low salt in our
household. Us too.
Yeah, very, very low. And we went somewhere and both me and my husband thought whatever we ate, it was at a restaurant, it was so loaded in salt, we thought it tasted almost metallic. Like it was actually bad, and that was just because we got used to so little salt. So your taste buds can adapt, it just takes time. Number 7, the last one here. So know your cooking times of whole grains. So one simple way of upgrading a recipe is swapping out brown rice for white rice or brown pasta for white pasta in a recipe. However, it isn't as simple as swapping it out. brown rice and whole wheat pasta take longer to cook and are often require more water and preparing. So you want to make sure that you are making sure that if you're swapping it out, you take those things into consideration.
Yes, absolutely. The water thing's a big one with soups and stews for sure, or mixed
Yeah.
dishes.
Yeah.
Can suck up all the water. So, not too hard to add more, but just something to be aware of.
Yeah, exactly. So those are our 7 meal planning things that or recipe swaps that you need to know when you're going to go ahead and start doing any recipe swaps. Andrea, do you have any other rules that you think are important to keep in mind, or we pretty much nailed them?
Yeah, I think this really ties in well to what we're going to be doing in the future episodes, and I think it also goes to show that it's an experiment. It's a learning piece of kind of, so it's how you learn. And so we were going to talk about some meal prep wins and fails, and very rarely have I ever had to throw food out because it's completely inedible. I can remember 2 times in my life. So ultimately, it's kind of like, okay, well, I learned from this. It's not the best, but this is what I'm going to do next time to tweak or change it. So you want to go about it in an exploratory way, not in a, oh my gosh, I failed. It's the end of the world. I'm never going to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. It is an experience, and one of the things we've been working with our clients lately is helping them when we start forming habits and start working towards goals. We have to envision who that new person is. So if you're wanting to get into meal planning and meal prep, you have to say, well, I'm going to be a meal planner. I'm a meal prepper, and I do meal prepping things. And the thing when you take on that persona, at the same time you're still learning, and there's always when you're learning a new skill, there's always going to be fails. So one of the things I'd like to lead into that we're going to be adding to the Get Meal Prepped podcast show is some personal experiences between Andrea and I, just so you know that there are wins and there are fails, and some days it feels like there's more fails than wins. So each episode, we're going to talk to you a little bit about our meal prep or meal planning win and our meal planning fail. So this episode, I'm going to talk about my one that happened this week. So probably about 2 weeks ago, I went to a freezer meal swap. So 6 women and I got together, and I cooked 6 meals. I did a chicken pesto pasta, and I made 6 individual freezer trays of this, and then we all got together and swapped. So I came home with, 5 different recipes, and they're all ready to go in the freezer. And I thought, wow, what a win. Look at my freezer. And I took pictures and I shared on social media. Look at me, I'm doing good. And so a week later happened, and I was coming home from the city, and I had my mother-in-law watching the kids, and she asked, hey, is there anything I can do to get ready for supper? And I thought, oh, you know what? It would really be one of those days that I need a freezer meal. So I told her, go in the freezer, grab any one of them, and put in the oven, and dinner will be ready when we get home. And I'm thinking, win, we're good to go. So where the fail happened was, I guess when we were getting the meals given to us, the person that had made this wonderful dish had put saran wrap over the dish, and then tin foil. And it wasn't noted, it wasn't marked anywhere, and likely she told me at the swap, but there was wine involved. And we were, it's a women's get together, and it skipped my mind, so definitely my bad there. And my mother-in-law had put it in the oven, and I was told later that the house started to smell like electrical fire or plastic burning. And when she opened it up and looked at the plastic, had melted to the pasta. So she didn't have the, I guess, courage to throw it out, and just kind of left it there for me. But the whole thing had to go out because there was bubbling plastic all over the top of the cheese.
Oh gosh.
So
that's
that,
the worst.
but the good thing was I did have a backup plan. We ended up having peanut butter and jam banana wraps for supper,
Yeah.
and it worked itself out. But that was definitely my win. I thought I did so great by doing this meal prep swap and having a freezer full of meals, but I didn't mark on it that, take off plastic underneath tinfoil, and definitely a lesson learned for the future. So it does happen.
Yeah, absolutely. A good way to double check, a good learning lesson for other people. I'm sure we've all been there, though. I've been there too.
Yep, absolutely. So we have a special, tip sheet for you guys at the end of this segment. You can look down below in the show notes, and we have a tip guide for you, and it is called the Recipe Makeover, and it's how to make your recipes healthier, and it's going to be all the different tips that we're talking about in the next 3 or 4 episodes about recipe makeovers. So make sure you download your copy just below in the show notes, and start taking a look at your recipes, and start slowly by figuring out what can I upgrade or change out or swap out or reduce, and see what you can do to make your recipes healthier.
So that's all for us today. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can subscribe there too. We actually would love if you could subscribe to us on the YouTube channel right now. We're needing to hit 100 subscribers so that we can ask to get the URL Get Meal Prepped, and it will just make it easier for other people to find us. So if you feel like helping us out, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes as well. Don't forget to get your recipe makeover guide that you can download below in the show notes as well. If you're looking for more information on meal planning, or to take our online meal planning course called Get Meal Prepped, go to www.getmealprepped.com for more information. And if you want to connect with us, please email us at info@nutritionacademy.co, or find us on Instagram at nutrition_academy, or you can also join our Facebook page called Nutrition Academy. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.